And if an organization is set up as a 501c3 to work to end circumcision, and then they use resources and their leadership to do something other than that, then there's a serious issue there.
Hello, Intactivists, and we are back with part 2. I hope you guys enjoy this. Brendon reveals a lot of important information that you guys should know. Just a reminder to like this and subscribe so you don't miss other updates that we give. All right, enjoy the interview. That's very interesting, though, that you did bring up the investment side of things, by the way, because I like to think of Forgin as an investment. And I've told people that, like, hey, you're not really donating, you're kind of investing in the future of science. You're the next level of foreskin regeneration, restoration. And it's a very interesting crowd that I've noticed from the Forgin side. What is your opinion of Forgin, if you have one? I don't know if you talk to them or anything.
I've liked all the people I've met from the organization. I want to go meta because I feel like 4gen is sometimes used as a shorthand to mean the possibility of regeneration itself. And that intention and the individuals involved in that particular company are actually two different things. So a lot of the time when people say that regeneration won't work, what they're actually saying is that they don't have faith in 4gen's particular team or method or level of funding. And those are two different questions. It's one of the reasons why on my own podcast, I talked about the idea of doing something called the D prize, which is Elon Musk is very famous for having the X prize, where he just gave 10 million to the first team who was able to do a independent space flight. And he didn't invest any money into space flight. He just said, if someone can do this, I will give you $10 million. And I think we should do the same thing for foreskin regeneration, that we should just say, if someone pulls it off, here is a pile of money. And so if you do that, there's no specific risk to you. You're not investing the money. The money's just sitting in an account. And if someone does it, great. I would pay $10 million to see that in the world. And if it doesn't happen, well, your money sits in the bank. So there are ways of going about that are different. And I also think that foreskin regeneration is possible now. It's just not FDA approved. So the method that 4gen is talking about using, you could go to a country outside the United States that has medical tourism and pay someone to do that. Again, there's obviously the risk of that. Will it work? And will there be any other things that we don't know about that process yet? But it is possible now. And so the method that 4gen is going about it will take a certain amount of time. And I think that if people get caught up in that, that's the only way it could happen. It's almost a scarcity mindset of like, well, like now we have to, people will start nitpicking 4gen and all of those hopes and fears and their own feelings around it come in. And if you just look at the possibility of it happening, one, it's something that we want to happen. And two, I think it's something that could already happen given the science that exists now, not including, what in the next 5, 10, 20 years could occur in science. And everyone I've met from the organization I like. So, it's one of those things where I like them. I think they're trying to do something good and important in the world. I don't know if their particular version of it will succeed, but I think that something will happen around that issue. And that it's also one of those things where when people criticize them, I sort of want to ask, like, okay, well, what are you going to do instead? Like there is a lot of trying to control others' speech or trying to control others' actions or trying to tell other people in the movement they're not doing as much, but like, okay, like, what are you going to do instead? My response, if I really thought that 4gen wasn't going to make it or there was no chance of them doing what they're setting out to do, my reaction would be like, oh, I got to start my own company. Like, I got to get involved. I got to find someone else. Like, I would love for there to be $10 million that I can set aside as a prize on this issue. And so my focus right now is like, okay, well, how do I change that aspect of my life? Like, how would I make more money? How would I find high net worth individuals who'd be interested in something like that? It's a shift in focus, because if there's a scarcity of like, well, fortune's the only way to do it, and are they like that's a very narrow vision. Whereas if you just expand your vision in some way, it's like, okay, there's actually a lot of ways this could happen. And we'll see. And maybe if you expand your vision, you might find a way that you could contribute to that.
Okay, that's very interesting. So when you say you like all of Forge and staff, is this before or after the switch? Because I know it was like Tyler, Matthew, and Eric, or is this the Ryan, William and the other person. I forget. I don't know. Well, who's the other person they switched with?
I know some of their new staff, but not all of them.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah,
All right, yeah,
I
because
yeah.
there were some people that were very upset when they switched, and they're like, "Who are these guys? We like what the application process? No one told us anything. You just swapped. Like what?" And
See,
it
I'm
was
not involved in their day-to-day politics, so like maybe there's
yeah,
something there, but it's not what I'm watching right now.
okay, interesting. So yeah, I think it's very great that they brought up the whole emotional side of investing because I do feel like a lot of people are very invested in foraging, and
Yeah,
like for me personally, like I think, and I've talked to other people about this, is that you can have a great idea, but if you don't have the know-how to do it, that's gonna be a problem. And a lot of people have made the criticism, like Enzo, you're an artist, right? Like that would be like me investing in a mining company that has a computer programmer as a CEO. Like, what are you doing? Like, you don't know about mining. I don't know. And I just feel like a lot of people get very defensive as soon as they hear that. They're like, oh, you just want men to be hurt forever. It's like, no, I'm trying to look at this rationally. And it's
yeah.
interesting that you said that, well, if you don't think fortunes might not work, you should go and do something else about it. Like, are you talking about like general activism, like protesting or trying to save babies, like trying to prevent it before it happens? Or are you saying like you should come up with your own biotech company? Because that is very
Ambitious. It would be a significant challenge. My advice to people is always to find what their skills are uniquely suited for and what they're excited to do. So I know that there are certain areas that I am really good at and others I'm not. I'm not a particularly organized person or good at event planning. So when I did the tour for my film, I had someone helping me with that. I am really good at creating media. I can sit down and an hour later have a video or a blog post or an article. I can breathe and basically create media. So in that area, I do it myself. And in areas where I'm not uniquely skilled, I hire people or work with other people. And that's what I
okay.
think every business owner does. So if Vincenzo can partner with people who are really skilled in this area and hire good researchers and other people to work with, I think he'll be okay. And if he tries to do it all himself, he probably can.
Okay, that makes sense. I also think you covered that in the Intactivist handbook
Yeah.
about okay.
We
Yeah.
talk about that in there too.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so you did give a whole lot of ways to do Intactivism. Can you just rattle them off like off the top of your head real quick for the audience?
So I could, and there's a lot of things people are already doing, but I think the interesting thing to think about is what people aren't doing. I have a book
Okay.
on my shelf that I really like called Blue Ocean Strategy that talks about it's another business book. It talks about how some of the most successful businesses are not those where you compete in a category, but create a new category. In other words, if you were to try to launch a soft drink, for example, well, there's a lot of those already, and you're going to be in a red ocean bloodbath of competition trying to do that. Whereas if you did something totally new,
Like a
you'd be
VTuber
the only one in the category.
Intactivist.
Exactly. Like you're doing something new. And you're also, by the way, uh doing that in a space that I think the movement needs. So there are conversations that people need to have internally in the movement, and there isn't a public space to do that. So a lot of time it happens through email and private Facebook groups and things like that. But actually having a space where people can talk to those in the movement is really useful. So I would look at other things that you like outside of activism and outside of this particular issue and see if there's a way to apply those to something you care about. In other words, if you really love stage and theater, like write a play. Has anyone done a play about this issue? Just like even something as simple as like a family drama. You've got a mom and a dad, and they're having conversations about this issue because their first child is coming soon. Like it it's going to depend on what the person is really interested in. For someone else, if I say write a play, they're like, how would I ever write a play? Okay, well, what's the area that you love, right? That no one else has done yet. I would look for that.
Okay. So I know we had this question on our Discord, and hopefully you're willing to answer it now. If you had to rate on how well intactivism or the genital autonomy advocacy is doing, what would you rate it as?
I think the movement in its current form will never end circumcision. So
Okay.
I could give you a number, but that's honestly the only piece of it that matters. And the reason I would say that is that a lot of people in the movement are acting from unhealed trauma, and the level of consciousness that the problem exists at, it'll never be solved at. So if you actually want to end this issue, I think people have to reach the place where they're actually aligned to doing that, and there aren't aspects of them that are self-sabotaging what they're doing. And right now I see a lot of that. So I mean, the entire thing I have going on right now around legal action is an example of people in the intactivist movement either consciously or unconsciously sabotaging their own issue.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of that, and it's not going to change until people seriously commit towards looking at the patterns that produce those actions.
So that's very important because I talk to a lot of people in this movement, and some people don't know like this level of issues in the intactivist movement. And I feel like it's important for people to know because a lot of people don't like pots because I'm bringing it out. I'm like, hey, like we're having these issues. People are saying this. Like, let's have a discussion so we can clear the air. And people are like, oh, you're making it look bad. But how do you feel about intactivism? Do you feel like there are like manipulation tactics used on people when it comes to intactivism? Do you feel like there are bad information that is perpetrating and like hateful, just like gossips and rumoring and things that are happening behind closed doors that you can't prove, and they do it on purpose so you can't prove it, but it's happening?
I don't have to speculate. I can prove the stuff that I've seen. I mean, I'm going to court because we've got the evidence of certain things that have happened. Let me back up and think about how to answer that. You brought up the reaction that you get for speaking about the issue, and I think it's the reaction that every dysfunctional family or community has when someone in that community raises a problem. That the person speaking about the problem is sometimes treated as the problem rather than the problem itself. So that people know what we're talking about, this is the piece of it that I've experienced and I'm aware of. In 2016, the founder of Brahim, Eliyahu Unger Sargon, had a meeting with multiple intactivists in which he said things about me that were not true and encouraged them not to support my film. At the time, no one involved in those meetings ever spoke with me about it. They never called me to tell me what was going on or confirm whether or not that was true. And as a result of that, there were certain people who didn't support the film and missed out on the opportunity to participate in all the good that we did. And that campaign continued. So when intactivists didn't do all of the things that they'd requested or that they tried to bully them into, there were multiple hit pieces that he participated in the media, in which they called the movement alt-right and fascist and said it was full of angry young white men and sort of all of these other false negative things about the movement. And then when I published my last book, they started going public with a lot of these and getting activists to try to sign on to their campaign, basically. And a lot of the ways that they went about that were extremely duplicitous and done in private so that I wouldn't have the chance to respond. In fact, there was one person involved in those meetings, Tim Hammond, who suggested to them, oh, well, maybe someone should talk to Brendon about what's going on. And the result was that Ellie went after him as an enabler of racism and started saying all sorts of similar accusations about Tim. And by the way, I think that's part of the reason you're getting some of the negativity you have is I know, for example, Galdef, his organization is one that you've wanted to have on. If they talk about these things publicly, then they have to talk about those meetings. And if an organization is set up as a 501c3 to work to end circumcision, and then they use resources and their leadership to do something other than that, then there's a serious issue there. And so they're in a position where, well, they don't want to talk about it because it would bring all this stuff up. But at the same time, the issue has not been addressed. And so it's getting worse. And it's one of the reasons that I'm pursuing justice in the way that I am now, because I didn't find out about much of what was going on until later. And I'm still learning new things about the extent of what was going on. And in my book, the Intactivist Guidebook, I write that the strength of a movement is the strength of the relationships between people. So this occurred because people did not have the relationship or communication skills to like make one phone call to me and say like, hey, this is going on. What do you know about that? Or is this true? Or what should we do? Like if that had happened, we'd be in a different situation now. And it also brought up a bunch of stuff for me because, you know, as Jonathan Conte put it in my documentary, he talked about how one of the feelings that arose when he discovered the issue of circumcision was that the people who were supposed to look out for him and protect him didn't. And I felt something similar when I learned what was going on, because it felt to me like, well, these are all people who are supposed to be standing up for my rights, and instead they're participating in things behind the scenes to silence me and to stop me from, you know, standing up for my rights. And it's sort of a re-traumatization of some of the feelings that I had around the issue of circumcision itself. And so on the one hand, I got to do all the healing work around that, which was as fun as it sounds, which is to say not very.
Yeah.
But I processed it, and it's one of the reasons I'm able to talk about it now. So I think that these are conversations that are going to be painful for people. Like there might be some stuff that comes up as a result of this, but it needs to, and the pain of addressing the issue is less than the pain of ignoring the issue. And it's interesting, by the way, there's a way now in which intactivist organizations are in the same boat as their opposition. So their opposition does not want to acknowledge the issue of circumcision and is kind of going, well, if we just ignore it, maybe it will go away because it could present certain issues for our organization. And intactivist organizations have their own issues that they're dealing with, that they're going, well, if we just ignore it, maybe it'll go away. Like, even though we know there's an injustice occurring here, well, if we speak up for it, then it might be difficult for us. So we're just going to ignore it. And if you can solve an issue within yourself, the part of you that is similar to the person that you're dealing with, then you can solve it for them too. So actually, if intactivists and intactivist organizations were to address this and look consciously and honestly at what's going on, then they would, if they were to solve this issue, they'd have the tools to solve the issues their opposition is dealing with and could make a greater difference on the issue. So that is why I see that I think that at the current level of consciousness or the current patterns they're acting from, the issue won't be solved because they're basically acting from the same patterns as pro-circumcision organizations in their opposition. Like there's this thing, we know an injustice has occurred. We know there might've been ways that they've been, or that they've been complicit in it, or that they knew what was going on and they didn't say anything or speak up at the time. But now there's the opportunity to change, and doing that might cause certain problems or pain. It's a very similar situation, even though all of the particulars are different. The same pattern, the same mindset is still there. And so if they want people to treat them a certain way when they're bringing up issues in a larger community that might be difficult, they have to model that first.
You know, that's very interesting that you bring that up because I think a lot of people in this movement, they're under the theory that, oh, they're just too busy. They're too busy. They can't handle my complaints. And I think because, you know, we started a Prevail over the system, that's no longer an excuse because now it's like, dude, watch this video. These are the complaints that I've been getting. Like, I'll handle the complaints of intactivism. I'll make a video of it, and then you can reply to it. All right. And it's interesting that you bring that up, that maybe they're not necessarily too busy to answer these questions. It's they're hiding it on purpose, which
You would create a form of accountability for them.
yeah.
Jocko Willink in his book on leadership talks about how if a leader doesn't communicate, then rumors abound. So if there isn't clear communication from the leadership of an organization or movement, then that's when there starts to be other people who step in and provide explanations that may or may not be accurate. So I think that it is in the interest of people to provide clear communication, and that you're doing them a service by giving them a platform by which they can do that that isn't their own platform. So if they publish something on their own channel, it is different than if someone else asks them a question and gives them the opportunity to respond. And I mean, I think if someone reached out to you and said, "Hey, I want to talk about this. Can you ask me about it?" Or, something like that, that you'd probably be open to that. And it's a case where I think when people don't want to answer the question, there's a reason. Like, there's a reason that they wouldn't want to answer these questions.
Yeah, I think people just have that gut reaction to be like, "Oh, you're attacking the movement by doing this." And it's like, well, most people aren't on the quote unquote team, like I know there's people on the Forgin team, Bloodstain Men team, but the majority of people are not waving that banner and they have these questions. And or any other, intactivist movement group. And it's it's very hard because I think you've done a wonderful job on what you've had to do, and it's just crazy. You had to suffer for 10 years of people, like, attacking you from behind the scenes, and
Not a full 10. We're coming up on it though.
oh, we're coming
Um,
up on okay,
yeah,
almost a decade. Um,
almost.
that's wild, and it's so demoralizing because I feel bad because what if somebody wants to make an intactivist business? They're like, I want to serve the intactivists. Like, let's go do this. And then they are just met with this opposition, which is what I'm going to ask you. What do you think is more damaging to this movement? Because I know a lot of people love to blame the pro circumcision groups, the circumcision choice. But do you think it's them or do you think it's the intactivists that are more damaging, or certain intactivists that are more damaging to this movement?
So the question is framed in a way that's not my focus. Like, I'm not thinking about who's the worst. I'm sort of focused on the things that I have control over, that I can change. And so
Well, I think if you
I
answer
don't
this,
know.
yeah, I think if you answer this question, it's gonna have intactivists reflect on, am I helping this situation or am I acting like the opposition? And I mean, if you ask me, I feel like most intactivists are going to trust the other people that have their banner of intactivism, right? And when somebody under that banner says, "Oh, Brendon Marotta sucks. He's racist." They're going to be like, "Oh, well, you're on my team, bro, so I trust you." And I feel like if a pro circumcision person said that, like, "Oh, Brendon Marotta sucks," you're like, "Dude, who are you? Get out of here. You insert bad words here about them, you know?"
Right.
Um, that was like the point I was trying to get at. And I don't know if you saw it like
Well,
that, but maybe not.
there's research around that relationships with intermediate reinforcement are the most stressful. In other words, if someone is your enemy and hates you, it doesn't feel good, but you kind of know what you're getting with them. And if someone's your friend and always has your back, it feels good. Those are the relationships we like best. But intermediate reinforcement actually feels worse than an open enemy, which is when someone's sometimes on your side and sometimes stabbing you in the back, and sometimes on your side and sometimes stabbing you in the back. That's the most stressful relationship because you never know what you're going to get. And it's also addictive the way that gambling is addictive. In other words, if you go to a slot machine, sometimes you'll win and sometimes it'll take all your money. And people keep playing because of the unknown outcome. And so I think what you're describing is that there are people in the movement who have or associated with, near the movement, adjacent to it, that have an intermediate reinforcement relationship with it, where sometimes they're on our side and sometimes they're participating in all of the major hit pieces that have occurred on the intactivist movement in the past 10 years. And in those cases, it is actually less stressful to just treat them as an enemy. To just go, okay, well, if you're going to participate in a hit piece on me, if you're going to publish things attacking me, publish things that aren't true, say things that aren't true, try to turn people in my personal relationships against me, like, that's enemy behavior, and we will just treat them as opposition. And so people who've been traumatized don't do that. One of the signs that someone's acting from trauma is that when someone wrongs them or attacks them, they will try to explain to their attacker why they don't deserve to be attacked rather than just setting a clear, hard boundary. Because as a child, when your parents came at you, or someone who was in an authority position, that was the relationship that people had of like, no, like you shouldn't do this. I'm actually being a good little boy. But these people aren't in that relationship. They're adults. They're responsible for their own actions. If they're attacking, it's because they've made a choice to do that. And you, as a person dealing with that, need to give them the consequences of that choice.
All right, so that's the end of part 2. Part 3 should be coming out next week. Hope to see you there. Bye.